Hey there, welcome to episode 68 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo, recording in the late afternoon of June 4, 2024. It's a Tuesday, the beginning of a heat wave in Vegas, which always sounds a little weird to say in the desert, but it's supposed to be extra hot. I do know that whatever's in the air in Vegas is definitely having an impact on my allergies, so we'll see if my voice argues with me throughout this episode, which today is titled Its Own Reward. The cover art of today's episode, if you happen to check those out, wherever you find your podcasts, is a photo of Mount Everest. You may recall Edmund Hillary is often given credit for saying, because it's there, but that is the wrong person. And so it is the wrong quote. Although they still go together. Why would you climb Mount Everest? The climb is its own reward. The journey is part of the gift. We'll get to those things. But because it's there, George Mallory, 30 years earlier, we'll get to that too. So, wherever you find your audio programs, hopefully you are able to see the show notes, the episode description. As usual, I have a couple of links in there, a couple more than usual, 3 more. Let me get to that summary first. If there was a guest or guests for an episode, I would list them in the show notes for future reference. Hopefully we'll return to having a guest now and then. We'll see. Sources of motivation and value for civic volunteers like me and you, maybe. Anyone working on open source projects, or really anyone doing anything for reasons that are not always obvious. Yeah, why would you climb a mountain for the fame and fortune? Which I suppose does follow, but that's not immediately offered. Let's hit those links. First of all, our innovateforvegas.org website is our homepage. It is our sort of business site when the IRS, or when we were getting our determination, or if we asked for like services for a 501c3, or sometimes a bank, if you're opening an account, they kind of list a few things that they'd like to kind of know about you. You're claiming to be a charity. Okay, you have an IRS determination letter. You're in the database. Are you a real thing? Can we see your website? So that's the purpose of the innovateforvegas.org website. It will also be our sandbox in which we can try out our new ideas, including one of the MyMuni components will be a way to highlight and make more discoverable local content creators. Now, Vegas has a lot of people, who are making a lot of Instagram videos and reels, I guess, and TikTok videos and YouTube shorts and full YouTube content. They cover all manner of the fun economy types of things. It'd be cool if they could be found. And, hey, this is content. So we can test publishing and discovering on our own website to get started. This is an expression that we used when I was at Netscape. It's called eating our own dog food. It's been around for longer than that, but we used to say that quite often. Everything at Netscape was web-based. We were developing the browser and the server. So we used our own browser and our own web servers, and everything internally was web-based. So whether you were filing an expense report or making a job description for a job rec, or putting in for time off, filing a status report, everything was an HTML form. It was all browser. It was a URL, an HR URL or accounting. So by using your own tools, you become more adept at the platform. You understand when things don't work the way that button should be over here. It's not, the page isn't looking right. And remember, this was in the good old days. Production near a street. This was in the good old days when HTML was it 301, I think? 2 something. So we were building things when HTML was still changing, the blink tag, things that if you are a younger consumer of this audio program, you may have no idea what you missed out on. Someday we'll have to see if we can get people to try out Netscape version 1. Interesting times. I was there, by the way, for Navigator 3 and then Communicator 4. So it was Navigator 4 plus Mail and News. I'm sorry, it was It was Navigator 3 plus Mail and News was Communicator 4. That was when the marketing and salespeople with ties and nice shoes were sitting in on the meetings. There was a change in a lot of things there. So yeah, that's our website. GitHub organization, github.com/innovate for Vegas. By the way, 4 is spelled out F-O-R, so innovate for F-O-R Vegas. Innovateforvegas.org website. Innovate for Vegas organization on GitHub. And we have a link to our Project Act GitHub. Project Act is the Autonomous Cohort Transformation Project. When we first started talking about it in October of 2022, the idea was to help other organizations similar to the then Code for Vegas Foundation who wanted to become independent, autonomous, with regard to Code for America, to help them transform their civic volunteer cohort into an independent entity. Now, I mean, that's still part of it, but now we're focusing on the autonomous cohort tessellation, which is a mosaic, a tapestry, some sort of a visually pleasing plane of interconnectedness, different organizations in different parts of the world, maybe starting with the U.S., United States, and seeing where that goes. And then there are various projects so that people who are working on a project, developing a new idea for a project, is trying to establish a new autonomous cohort, an effort to develop tools and methods and actually, to be honest, to take advantage of already existing tools and methods. So this is not a new idea, not by any means. Decentralization of, development efforts, open source software is big on this. But yet discovering each other, collaborating, knowing who is working on what, it's all part of the mix. Now, instead of a top-down infrastructure concept that Code for America had developed, we're looking at sort of a self-powered, decentralized, flat communication, collaboration structure. So as long as you can discover other people, then you can communicate with them, and then you can collaborate. We don't depend on a central authority for that. So I've actually been working on putting together that GitHub org. Our website will follow shortly after that, as with all of the website projects I'm working on. So Project Act will start off on GitHub, since there are some tools to develop and some methodologies to build tests for and so on, some documentation to create. So I've started off with the core how-to documentation, which is strangely very similar to the Innovate for Vegas Foundation documentation, sort of a onboarding or how to get started, and a basic profile homepage. There are 2 projects, 2 top-level projects, transformation, tessellation, so we can get started on those. So it's a starting point. I did an episode 2 weeks ago about the order of operations. Our public-facing priorities are really about connecting with other like-minded civic volunteers who may feel abandoned or disappointed or disconnected as a result of the brigade program from Code for America being sunset in December of 2023. It looks like attempts to build a top-down organization may not be getting as far as they could, maybe. But either way, the tools that we'll develop first will be enabling technologies or use of enabling technologies to connect organizations and projects so that one person doesn't end up maintaining a spreadsheet. It is the 21st century, after all. So Project Act. Project Act is the more important outside project. Our infrastructure as code. By the way, I've already talked about Pulumi. I'm intrigued. On the one hand, Pulumi seems like it's just another way of having the same issues as Terraform, which and now its angry cousin OpenTofu. They do a declarative approach. Pulumi allows for procedural programming. You can do a YAML file, which is declarative. And then you, either way, you build a declarative state that gets deployed. So your orchestration pretty much happens the same way from what I understand of the under the hood components. But at the end of the day, well, I mean, it calls the APIs and whatever other utilities exist on the platforms of the provider. So AWS has CDK, Azure has their own version of that, and I think Google is building their own version of that too. So you have an API to the individual clouds. Anyway, so that's too much detail for today. But Pulumi has added their automation API, which would enable the calling. Now you can do this with Terraform too. There are different ways of calling the Terraform sort of processor. It's kind of like an interpreter / state compiler. You can call it in different ways as a command line tool. Pulumi has a automation API, so you can actually integrate the Pulumi step. You can call on Pulumi from inside other code, and it will take care of some orchestration. That sort of raises some interesting possibilities. I had talked about how one approach that I'm not taking myself, but that would seem interesting. So not this week. If you could implement with a visual programming model, because there are utilities that will take your state as deployed, and it will make a graph. So it will show you icons or circles, what's connected to what, names and values and things. And that's useful. But if you can design that way, if you could design the equivalent of a declarative state with visualization, that would probably enable people to more clearly see what they're building. If you've never done anything declarative before, I've mentioned this before. I've done a lot of stuff with XML and XSL T, so it's kind of weird. It's not for everybody. So if enabling people would mean taking an Excalibur drawing or a flowchart from some piece of software, maybe you have I'm not sure what Windows people would use, but Excalibur is a good example because it creates SVG files. So if you can take something that would interpret the SVG structure, scalable vector graphics, which is an XML file. So if you can draw a thing using shapes that are predefined, you can at least start with, here's what your orchestration looks like, not here's what the declarative code you wrote or procedural code you wrote will make so that your orchestration will look like this. So I think that would be useful. It's not something I would work on just yet, but the automation API for Pulumi raised one eyebrow for now. But anyway, so Pulumi, I believe, will factor into all of our various projects. I've alluded to what they are in previous episodes. Ideally, we can show, not tell. So I don't really want to spend too much time at this sort of, not an inflection point, but this milestone, I guess. Now I'd said I'm going to try to talk about progress each week. So today is more about motivation for others to consider what we're doing, taking a break from talking about progress on which of the priority lists, in which order they appear. Now let's get to the next three links. First of all, one I've pointed to many times across my various episodes of different programs, the Start With Why video from Simon Sinek from a million years ago. It was a TEDx talk. It's a good one. It's probably his most, it's his most natural. Everything, because once you've seen that, you're like, oh, okay, that's maybe the biggest group of people he's presented that to, maybe, because it was still a little bit rough. It was good. It was fine, but he's gotten a lot of mileage out of the Start With Why presentation. But, seeing it in its early days, it's still basically the same message, but you're seeing it where he is starting with why, right? The 100th time you give the same presentation, it's just different. A little bit more polished, but a little bit less personal. maybe. Anyway, so the YouTube video there, start with why. It's always a good thing to ponder. Next, I have a Wikipedia page for the long tail. It gives more of a business, economics view, but it does allude to how it applies to the modern day online economy and so on. Essentially, the long tail says instead of going for, so it's a kind of hyperbolic. So instead of going for short term, like if the horizontal axis is time, instead of going for huge gains in a short period of time, which may or may not be sustainable, you just slow and steady. And the volume under the curve could be larger, could be more sustainable. So it may or may not be larger, but it may last much longer. So over time, it may approach some unicorn that burns out after the first year or two, never hits that 7-year mark. But the long tail, some of that is about motivation, so it seemed appropriate to include here. So we'll talk about that later. And because it's there, I've already alluded to that, George Mallory, 30 years before Edmund Hillary and his co-climber, probably some Sherpas that had been up there 10 times already. But George Mallory, first to refer to his reasonings for wanting to climb and probably summit. Maybe he did. Why do you want to do it? Why do you want to climb it? Because it's there. So that sort of thinking does factor into why it is that someone would want to be a civic volunteer, an open source developer, etc. So let's get on with the show. And so we'll start with why. Why would anyone want to work on open source projects for free, usually for free, at least initially, to give away their efforts for others to use and benefit from? That's sort of the open source ethos. Part of the social contract with open source development is if you use open source, you should try to give back in some way, right? And then the error that many people make is that, open source, that's only coding. If I'm not a coder, I can't give back. And that is about as far from the truth as you can get. Because here's the thing, you are not a coder, and if you're using open source software, there are probably other people who are not coders using open source software. So you have the insights of a person who is not quite so technically inclined, at least when it comes to software. And of course, I'm talking about open software now, open source software. There could be open source hardware. There could be other open source initiatives that are not strictly computer technology. So apply as needed. But even though you are not specifically technically inclined, so you couldn't like roll your sleeves up and start, like you're not a car mechanic. If you're driving a car, it doesn't mean you're a car mechanic. But it does mean you know how the car works for a non-car mechanic. So if you are using open source things and you can give feedback, you can make suggestions. If you find a problem, you find a better way of doing something. If you have a friend who doesn't speak the language of choice for the platform, maybe, but you speak another language, you can do translations, you can help a translation. There's all kinds of things. So the whole social contract, again, is to say, I'm using this for free. I could give back. And then another way is to develop open source things yourself. Again, whether it's software or whatever, you're kind of contributing to the value of the universe in which we function. So yeah, so part of, I guess, social contract sounds very formal, but part of the reason, part of the motivation there is, I'm using stuff that I've gotten for free. I've been using free software, Debian Linux, in fact, and other stuff, but Debian Linux for sure, since 1997, 96, 97, when I joined Netscape. I built my own Pentium Pro, dual Pentium Pro machine, blazing fast 200 megahertz, and it was running Debian Linux, and I've not looked back. So Debian is very big on open source development and contribution to SAME. So somewhere along the way, it was, incumbent upon me to realize the amount of value I was being handed So in my travels, I've worked on open source, this and that. Back in my Silicon Valley days, I tended to work on closed source projects for different kinds of companies. When I worked at Intel, everything was open source. That was cool. And everything I'm doing now is open source. So eventually the crows come home to roost, as they say. Why would anyone volunteer to work on community projects to gather resources? Think food, clothing like socks, medical supplies, cooling devices for a hot summer here in Vegas, etc. Perhaps contribute resources. Maybe you bring some canned food or some clothing items, or maybe you drop it off at a gathering. Here in Vegas, we have an annual event called Gobble Gobble Give. A friend of mine, Don, puts that on every year in November, but maybe other times of the year. Maybe contributing to a central, like a Goodwill or a Salvation Army, if you like those, or a similar organization near you, shelters, etc. So there are always places to contribute resources, whether time is the resource or some other thing. Maybe it's directly to others or to a local community. So why would anyone do that? Why would they do that? Well, maybe it's karma. Maybe it's just wanting to make the community a better place. Why do you pick up a gum wrapper on the sidewalk? No, I'm not likening people to that. I'm saying that because why not? You can do a little piece, and then somebody else does another little piece, and they add together. So, and besides, this is a community you live in usually. If you are participating in local events in your neighborhood or in your town or your city, you are making your own home, by extension, a little bit better for you and other people. So that math is not hard to do. And if you really think about it, the open source thing, not too difficult to make that connection. Your virtual open source communities are usually distributed around the world or around larger areas than your neighborhood. So it's a similar approach. And, you might be in the position that you are finding others someday. And it's always nice to have some karma in the bank. Usually nice. Why would anyone choose to help others with individual or group development as a mentor, advisor, experienced contributor? So if you've already started a company, if you've already been working on projects for years, decades, if you're on your fifth startup, maybe you were a school teacher, maybe you were a research scientist, maybe you've been a language translator professionally, maybe any number of things. You could always fill a mentor role for a student entering or considering entering one of your fields of expertise and experience. You may advise groups or early stage startups, because guess what? If they're successful, they may add a little something to your own backyard. An experienced contributor. Maybe you've been doing the things that others are attempting to do with less experience. They're new to the game. They're trying to get an effort started to, I don't know, make an open transit project or open data capture platform. So maybe you can do what Sean Looker did when he said, hey, I helped co-found Code for Vegas. I can be on your board of directors when you're starting Code for Vegas Foundation and then Innovate for Vegas Foundation. And I can see if I can help based on my experience. So we are an all-volunteer organization. There was nothing in it for Sean other than a good feeling knowing that he helped continue a thing he started. So the reason to do any of these things is, it could be anything. It could be quite different between you and me and your friend and your other friend and some people you don't even know. So it's a very individual journey that we're all on. Why do we do anything, really? Well, let's get back to that long tail. There's, as I said, there's especially lately, a popular notion that you must come up with an idea, something novel, and of course, this goes without saying, something in the technology sector, especially something AI-based. Last week it was Web3, about middle of last week, it was Bitcoin and Web3. And then by Friday, it was augmented reality or virtual reality. I think now it's moving back to blockchain. Maybe, I think augmented reality is kind of making a little comeback. This week, though, it's artificial intelligence. So you really got to pitch your new idea, try to get a bunch of money, and launch your company with an exit plan. You must have an exit strategy already in place so that your company that may have been something you were actually interested in can be sold. So that's the short tail. That's the rare unicorn strategy, but it's the explosive growth. Make your investors money. Get out. So it's a less flashing take on pursuing an idea. We can post everything online. We focus on content, on likes and shares, traffic and monetization. So we're always thinking about how could this be another reel or short? How could this be content? How can I do some product placement? How can I get more viewers so I can charge more as an influencer? We have to develop our online clout and thus a possibility for big fame and fortune. So yeah, we got to, but we can't really enjoy the fame and fortune. We can definitely look like we're enjoying it so we can get more footage. That's an old term when there used to be actual film. So we can get more content. I appreciate it. I know content creators do some interesting stuff. Everything is performative, though. It gets a little weird, but it is a thing. So you could argue that that's a sort of a long tail and everyone has a story about starting off with 10 subscribers on YouTube or 2 followers on Instagram. Where are they now? Not everyone can be Selena Gomez, which I believe she has the most followers on Instagram, if that's still true. Mr. Beast has the largest number of subscribers on YouTube. So those are lofty goals, but we can always dream. The long tail notion, though, we can, rather than pursuing explosive growth. Now my voice is really making this a challenge. I'll apologize if it gets worse. My voice will apologize to me later, I hope. So instead of always pursuing explosive growth, the massive market share, top rankings for traffic and views, and always thinking about an exit, right? And by the way, always taking input from your investors. Hey, instead of doing the most good for the most number of people, let's do the most good for your investors. So you could counter that by being slow and steady. Wins the race, if what I've heard is correct. Slow and steady approach to making and building and succeeding over some period of time, not a month, but not 5 years, maybe 5 years, may have greater net outcomes. You may not be quite as wealthy. You won't make your investors as much money because maybe you're the investor, but it will be your project. It will be you and your co-founders trying to accomplish what you want to accomplish. Maybe it's a side project until it becomes self-sustaining, but it's closer to what you really wanted to do. Even big companies are embracing the long tail. They have been over the last 2 decades, maybe. They realize that just providing a little bit of extra value, increasing over time, or what is it? Selling less of more. Something. There's a whole book which is referred to in the disambiguation page for long tail. So it is a book and it focuses more on online. But the long tail is a way of pursuing things you want to pursue without following the recipe that seems to be on the top of everybody's slide deck, which is pitch, angel, first round, VC, MVP, somewhere in there, massive growth, return on investment to your investors of at least 15%, I think, in 5 years. If you've gone 7 and you're not a unicorn, you've taken too long and you've wasted people's money. Or you can do what's called a lifestyle business and do things that are enjoyable, that give back to the community, or that are in some way satisfying to you, and they won't quite make the Wall Street Journal. They won't make the top of the news for the biggest trades, the biggest acquisition. You won't be acquired by a FANG company. Maybe you will, though. So you never know. To be honest, if you aim for the short tail, if you aim for the vertical leap, you could fail. I wonder if you look at it that way, like you got to shoot your shot. If you don't get your funding, you really need to hire like 50 people and buy up all the NVIDIA GPUs and everything. So if we don't get that, we're done. But if you say, hey, we can approach this as a project we just want to work on, maybe it'll get somewhere. No particular drop dead date, no room full of investors, no particular pressure, no room full of investors asking when they're going to get their investment back. So the long tail approach could be a little bit safer. I actually don't know this. I'm thinking about this right now. If anyone has, I'm sure someone has. If someone has compared, because fun fact, startup burnout rate, like they don't make it, is almost the same as restaurants. And everyone knows that restaurants don't have a great success rate. Something like 20% over 5 years. So, they're still open after 5 years. That's something like 20%. And the same is generally true of startups, plus or minus like 2% or something. But those are short tail. Those are vertical, explosive growth, funding, exit numbers. I don't know what the long-term, long tail comparison looks like. That's something I will tackle. So the 20% side project, if you've ever heard of that, you may have heard of Gmail. Allegedly, Gmail. AdSense, allegedly, but that one I know it was an acquisition. So really it was the tuning of AdSense, perhaps, the integration of the Notion. I actually met someone who was in the small group of people who had founded the company that would become AdSense, and I do not remember what the company was. He was kind of an advisor in a accelerator program that we had over the summer during the pandemic lockdown from my alma mater. So I'm not sure about that AdSense story, but that's in the Wikipedia page about the long tail. But wait, do I have? Oh yeah, I think it is in the long tail one. Yeah, sorry. If it isn't, side project. Probably, wait, did I not? No, there's a 20% link. Hang on a second. All right, we're back. I had to put that link in there. I did have, so I didn't mention in the link section, but I put it in there. It's a Wikipedia page to side project time. It's about 20% side projects. So in that article, Wikipedia article, they do mention Google used the 20%. So usually on Friday, you'd work on a project. They used the 20% project scheme. It sounds like a ruse, but it's, I know people that enjoyed it, to develop Google Mail or Gmail and AdSense, which was actually an acquisition that they developed into their world marketing domination and personal information vacuum. But anyway, so the 20% project, it does have value. You have to be careful though. If you are working for a Google or any company that does offer the 20% option, usually you have to be careful that the company doesn't, well, they'll probably tell you. If you're working for any sort of a quality company, they'll tell you up front. When you work on a project like this, on the company dime, they own what you're working on. You just get to pick what you want to work on. So I've seen this happen. It's never happened to me. But if you are working on a project and the 20% or the side project program, the company owns it. So don't think you're going to spin off. And now I will say some companies have actually done the, we'll be your first investor. We'll spin off your project. We get first refusal on reacquiring, whatever the terms they want to do. But in general, if you do a 20% side project, it's still company time. One alternate possibility is to make your own 20%. So you have to scrape together your side time. So you get into the first problem I described, right? You're going to be tired. You're fueled by your own passion and motivation. So you're not getting paid for your time initially, but maybe you can get one or two other people, you have similar ideas, similar constitution, and you can solve a real problem. And then you turn your side gig into your main gig. And there are countless articles. They're not all technical. They're not all the next Netflix or whatever. They're side gigs, and you grow it into a legitimate business. So decide early on if you're going to do for a company or for yourself. And by the way, the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, because we don't compensate anyone, anything you work on and contribute to our projects, you assign the copyright of your contribution to Innovate for Vegas Foundation, and we maintain the open source licensed repository and so on. That doesn't mean you can't take your own work and build a company around it. So you've contributed to an open source project, but you still, that's your code, that's your intellectual property in the case of software development. So in general, just because you have contributed creative work to a project, you've not, unless you read the license terms, you've not necessarily given away your ability, your rights to the thing you created. You've just given other people rights to the thing you've created, and you're assigning the copyright of what you contributed to the repository, not to what's in your head. I think that's the thing that throws people off. You've contributed work to a repository. Other people can use it. You can't, production by a street, you can't sneak up behind them someday and say, you're using my software, I'm going to sue you. So you've released it under an open source license or whatever, but the ideas in your head are still yours. So it could be, and by the way, we're an open source charity. So if your team, by the way, this is a business model that I've talked about for 2 years. If you and your team working on open source projects say, oh, we can make something out of open transit, let's build a company around it. Yes, you should. That's what we're here for. So I always tell people, I don't want you to work for free, but I want you to be willing to work for free. And if you can find people like that who are similarly directed, motivated, energized, you'll probably get places. So the journey, there's an old story, which I believe is an African proverb. It's a student travels a great distance on foot to retrieve something. I think it might be seashells, but Africa's a big place. So it depends on where. But whatever it is, some sort of an item that would be difficult to come by, but for a long trek, a long round trip. Something is given to the teacher. The teacher says, you traveled too far to get this. And the young person says, but teacher, the journey is part of the gift. It is the effort that you give, the energy you expend. These are part of what you're contributing. You may be helping to move the couch, but you showed up. You're spending the time that you could be spending somewhere else. So all of it, driving, the U-Haul, the rider truck, whatever it is, all of these things, they're kind of the same idea. I have another sort of template. You could say, for example, working on open source, and then the common ending would be is its own reward. It's also a title of an audio program episode. This way of thinking is based entirely on the person doing the work. So you may or may not feel this way about whatever it is you're doing. Might be you. You may do things because the journey is part of the gift, or because doing things are their own reward. I'm trying to think of what's my latest. I volunteered for junior achievement. Why not? Because I believe in education and I think we could be doing better. So I wanted to learn. So I did have an ulterior motive. But at the end of the day, the sure thing is that volunteering and talking to 7th graders about their career paths is its own reward initially. Sometimes a challenge is the entire reason. So whether it is climbing Mount Everest, opening your own restaurant, writing shell scripts to update your website, the list goes on. Sometimes the reason to surmount obstacles and challenges is literally, as George Mallory said on being asked why he was climbing Mount Everest, and as Edmund Hillary would say 30 years later, because it's there. So some people accept the challenge as the fuel that powers their effort to overcome, to dominate the challenge, to win. I've known people who, watch the clock on a commute and try to get a better time because it's there. There's a corollary that I like to use for those who believe that there is that they themselves are aspiring or nascent or maybe experienced entrepreneurs, or it doesn't have to be entrepreneurs. Now that I think about it, it could be just depends on what the ask is, I suppose, or what the opportunity is. If you're entrepreneurial, or if you maybe want to work in classrooms with students, or whatever it is. So you don't necessarily have to be entrepreneurial. So I should adjust my notes. But if you want, are about to, or have entrepreneur experience, for example, you may want to observe and describe a gap, a block, a problem in need of a solution. And to those people, I would say, who else but you? So if you have a particular area of expertise, or you're about to, or you have a pointed interest, such that my favorite one, an actual true story, was an entrepreneur here in the greater Vegas area said, "Hey, how come there's no local media covering entrepreneurial efforts? I always have to look to, national or media in other places to talk about what I'm doing. Nobody here does that." So I asked that person, "Well, would you like to be a part of changing that?" And he said, I'm too busy. A true entrepreneur would probably say something more along the lines of, I'm too busy. What can I do to help? It might be, can you spend 1 hour a week trying to, I can spend 1 hour a week. So sometimes you want to do things to find out because you're curious. So it isn't necessarily what is it? It's not that the journey is part of the gift, or that the task is its own reward, but it's the outcome, the result, the lesson learned during the journey, perhaps. At the end of the day, a lot of volunteer effort, a lot of work that one does without not getting a paycheck. You haven't agreed on a sum, a tidy sum. There's no arrangement in place. There's no exit plan or exit strategy. These happen because we want to, because the specific action or effort is indeed its own reward. So still a possibility. But what if we take part in these activities to find out? So it is its own reward itself. I want to emphasize it is possible to volunteer with only an ulterior motive. So like I said, my junior achievement time, I could have gone there only because of my education goals, I guess. I think our education system in Southern Nevada needs attention. So one of our projects, capstone, or the overarching description of it is education for Southern Nevada. So I could have said, I'm going to go here only for my project. But the time spent with people in that age group, I think 7th grade, age 12, approximately, is that's an important time. So there's real value in talking to people in that age group about what they plan to do, how they plan to get there, whatever their career aspirations are, educational aspirations, etc. So there was a kind of a split. There was reward in the actual volunteer time spent that day, but it was also part of a larger undertaking, and this was some data points, if you will. So we take part in these activities to find out if there's some related idea that we could work on that would, or if an idea we already have could work, or if there's the possibility of developing an idea. So it could be reconnaissance. It could be sort of some testing, some early exploration of like whether there's a match. Like, this might work. If only I could talk to a room full of 7th graders for a day and see. So it could be as simple as trying out a method for describing like a presentation, but you want to try it out on a 12-year-old student about goal planning, early entrepreneurial notion implantation. How do you plant those seeds early so that they aren't thinking, I just have to work for someone else? So there's a lot of opportunity just in education. But in general, you could learn something from your specific volunteer effort or efforts that you can apply to the next thing you're working on. So as one of my team said at the America's Greatest Makers reality show that we were part of, I'm paraphrasing, you can learn what you need to learn to do what you want to do, whatever the doing is. It might even be that some early efforts are foundational for other efforts of any kind. It could be directly or maybe indirectly or adjacent, or even only abstractly connected into the future. So maybe you've met others. So maybe part of your intended or sometimes unintended value proposition for yourself is not only that the volunteering is its own reward, but I might actually run into people who are with similar goals, of similar mind. Sometimes startups start that way. So we're getting to the end. Promise. That's my voice telling me that, so I thought I'd pass that along. My allergies are awful. I have to say, part of the reason I'm recording this episode later in the day is I get almost daily sinus headaches because, there you go. I never get headaches, but right over my right eye. You can push on your, owie. So finally, speaking for myself, what's up with Innovate for Vegas Foundation and civic volunteerism and all that, which is indeed the theme of today's episode. So most of my efforts are long tail. The days of startups in Silicon Valley in the recent past are in the past. I learned a great deal, but I do not relish a return to those places and ways, so I do not intend to. Silicon Valley itself, very pretty, very nice, a lot of stuff going on. That is true of everywhere in the world. So I did my time. I believe, did I say this already? I think I was I arrived in 1993. I moved in 2001, returned in 2005, departed in 2013. So what is that? 16 years, plus the time spent working for Intel, but living in Las Vegas. So there was a little bit of overlap. So 16 plus like another 3. And then, so something like that, about 19. I've done my time. Volunteer efforts can be self-directed, which I appreciate. I've done my tour at big companies. I worked at Philips Components, Philips Royal Electronics, the global company, had 160,000 people worldwide. Intel, when I worked there, had 100,000. I worked at Apple, a tiny little company when I was there. Not super tiny. I worked in the Newton Group, though. That itself was tiny. I've worked at small, medium-sized companies, startups. So I've been there and done that. But solopreneur, small startup team, volunteer efforts, you get to sort of choose your own direction, flex your expertise a little bit. You get to actually say, ooh, I know this. And you can do it. You are controlling your time, which is always valuable to the project. You can focus on real problems, on issues, gaps. You don't have to worry about the politics necessarily or the mission of the company. You don't have to argue about whether it's a 20% project. There is room for you to try things, maybe on a shoestring budget or less. This is where Project ACT is. We're aiming to address a real gap with the disappearance of Code for America and their stewardship, if what there was of it at the end, of their brigade community, the brigade program that they started, I want to say, was it 2012 or something? It was either right after or not right after, but after Code for Vegas initially formed. Code for Vegas was not a brigade. It was just part of Code for America, if I'm understanding the history correctly. So the brigade program under that moniker came a little bit after Code for Vegas. So there was no official Code for Vegas is a brigade of Code for America. It was simply part of Code for America. So their stewardship of the brigade program, especially at the end, and their what I call a rug pull of the brigade program, has left some capable civic volunteers kind of on their own. So Project ACT seems like it's a good idea to try, and we don't have to ask anyone. We can build it. Okay, I'll say it anyway. If we build it, they will come. Perhaps. If we build the tools and the platform and on the methodologies of proven methodologies from before, from the old days, 20 years ago maybe, of decentralized connection and communication, construction of catalogs, a lot of C words, catalogs of projects and organizations that can be self-maintaining rather than having to go and figure out who is still in business, who's still responding to things. Whenever you see a spreadsheet, you got to think to yourself, is a person doing this? Like you have a human being spending their time doing what computers do. So we should take advantage of that. And there's more to it than that. But Project ACT is the beginnings of the mindset that you don't have to take direction from above. You can ask for help, offer collaboration, and collaborate and cooperate. Cooperate, that's a good word. Cooperate with your neighbors in a nice, flat, peer structure without central planning and all that. This does not say that your organization, Innovate for Vegas Foundation, is not a decentralized, flat organization. I think as you get smaller and smaller, you need to have some structure until you get really small. Then you can go back to flat. So if it's you and your 3 friends working on a startup, you're all kind of mixing together, doing what you need to do, etc. If you have 10, 50, 100 people, that's hard to get everybody on the same page. So you need to have some sort of structure. But if you're not, so if you all can fit in a big room, if you can all fit on a Zoom call or equivalent, we use Jitsi. But if you are in multiple cities, multiple projects, you can't. The central planning has been shown to be bad. Not Code for America, but I mean in general. Once you are distal communications, coordination, collaboration planning gets a little unwieldy. There's no reason for it. Well, there is a reason for it, but not for volunteers. So Project ACT there's a gap. We can try to address it. We don't have to ask permission, and we can see if it will work. Will this work? We'll find out. The Innovate for Vegas Foundation itself continues to be a literal foundation on which we hope to build a future of innovators, whether they're here in the greater Vegas area or beyond. So part of Project ACT will also help us reach out to other people beyond Nevada. It turns out the culture of innovation in the greater Vegas area leans 100%, plus or minus 5%. So we'll say 95% into fun economy or education here is focused primarily on training employees. This is not to say there are not entrepreneurs in Vegas. There are many. The question is, what are they doing? Where are they? Do they want to collaborate on things? Do they have to be an employee? No, but it is possible, and in fact, encouraged to collaborate with others, to be able to know how to turn innovation into implementation, to know how to turn ideation into innovation. So if you can work with others, and if you can work together sometimes to elevate your communities, that benefits, guess what? You and your fellow members of your community. So if you can spend some of your expertise, some of your time, you can be mentoring, you can be contributing to projects, you can be helping others to do the same. You can see real outcomes by listening to people and co-creating with them. And we are a public charity. We're 501c3. We've gone through that effort. It wasn't too bad, but we have done that work. So the idea now is to A, elevate our communities, B, see a strengthened community of innovation, culture of innovation. So community elevation, culture of innovation. So community elevation, I'm not even reading this, that's why. Community elevation, culture of innovation, and a foundation on which we can see the population of innovators, entrepreneurial innovators, in fact, grow and work together rather than the silos and only half full at that we have today. We're not going to be the next Silicon Valley, but production industry. But if you are going to exist in the modern era, you should be able to implement real solutions to real problems without always, 100% of the time, going to third parties out of state with a profit motive rather than, wow, I apparently am near a drag strip. Sorry, we're right at the end. So without always depending on others, right? That was the Morlocks and the Eloi. The Eloi are fine, but be Morlocks. Just don't eat the Eloi. So that's about it. That's where we are. So I will often hear from people, why are you doing this? And I always go to my the Change Bank commercial from Saturday Night Live. I cannot remember the name of the Change Bank. It actually has a fake name like Delaware Savings and Loan or whatever. But the Change Bank, I believe, is the end of part one. It's a two-parter, and I think I have both parts for posterity. The bank manager, it's a black background, like documentary style, interviewing people at the bank, customers. People always ask me, how do you make money doing this? The answer is simple: volume. So yeah, we just need to do more projects and it'll all work out fine. But seriously, the value proposition varies from person to person. It's generally somewhere in the areas that I've described, probably more than one, overlapping. Innovate for Vegas Foundation, I think, is important. It's an important piece of a puzzle. It's an important piece of a puzzle that probably has a few missing pieces, but certainly needs a few more people to work on it. I believe it is a puzzle, not a mystery. That means a solution is possible. As we contribute more to the system, we are monotonically approaching. Monotonically? We are not deterministically. What am I? Stochastically. One of those. We're approaching a solution, a mystery you never know for sure if you're approaching or leaving. Here's how you know. A puzzle, every time you add a piece in the right place to a puzzle, you are one piece closer to solving the puzzle. A mystery, if somebody gives you a clue, it may be completely bogus and it may point you in the completely wrong direction. So a mystery is not the same as a puzzle. That's from Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if he came up with that, but it's like complicated versus complex, one of those kind of things. Anyway, don't forget, check out our website, innovateforvegas.org. We will eventually be primary publishing of our media content and other things, news announcements and so on. We'll eventually move away from the LinkedIn page. Nobody reads that anyway. Nobody's interacting with it, so not worth it. It will be part of first of all, we'll be just posting more content on our website, our business website. We do have the for.vegas platform that we'll start trying to get people to contribute to. So if you're coding for Vegas or creating for Vegas or volunteering for Vegas, mentoring for Vegas maybe, we'll still publish all of our programming in the usual places. Wherever you found this, it will probably still be there. But we'll definitely have a primary point of publication that is our website. And that will be part of the My Muni project, which we'll see deployed as an actual commercial endeavor powered by Innovate for Vegas Foundation and other civic volunteers working on open source software as deployed. And you'll hear about it from the Cafe Genius Impresarios audio program, which I release on Fridays. So there you go. If you found this audio program somewhere, you will probably find Cafe Genius Impresarios near the same place. Or on the same platform, in the same place? One of those. I should stop talking now. Thank you for listening. Take care.